As soon as we get a quorum, we'll kick this off. So that's what we're waiting for. That didn't mean you have to be quiet. You're welcome to talk. So. We've got 10. We need 13. So if anybody knows 3 members of Congress are available, 11. 2 more, and we'll get started. Good morning. A quorum being present, I now call this meeting of the Committee on Small Business to order. For those of you who follow our committee, you know how relentless we are in our advocacy for America's 29 million small businesses. We do this because we recognize the critical role they play in our economy and our nation. Small businesses make up to 99% of all firms and employ 47% of the people working in America today. These small firms generate 46% of our gross national product. In fact, you could say the term small business is a bit of a misnomer when you consider how important small businesses really are to our nation. Over the past 3 years that I've had the pleasure and the opportunity and the honor to serve as chairman of this committee, we have continued vigorous oversight of the Small Business Administration, or SBA, and its statutorily authorized programs. While many are excellent, providing our nation's entrepreneurs with a wide variety of services, there are some programs that could use a little tweak here and there to help small businesses, small firms get started, grow, and boost our economy. At numerous oversight hearings, we have heard from many small businesses and SBA industry partners about ways to improve some of these programs. As a result, we will be marking up 5 bills this morning. H.R. 2763, the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Improvements Act of 2017, introduced by Mr. Knight and co-sponsored by Ms. Murphy. Also, H.R. 2594, the Small Business Payment for Performance Act of 2017, introduced by Mr. Fitzpatrick and co-sponsored by Ms. Murphy and Mr. Knight. H.R. 2333, the Small Business Investment Opportunity Act of 2017, introduced by Mr. Knight and co-sponsored by Ms. Chu and Mr. Curbelo. And H.R. 2364, the Investing in Main Street Act of 2017, introduced by Ms. Chu and co-sponsored by Mr. Knight and Ms. Ming. And finally, H.R. 2056, the Microloan Modernization Act of 2017, introduced by Ms. Murphy and co-sponsored by numerous members of this committee. As has become standard practice during my tenure as chair of the committee, these bills today are bipartisan. I would like to thank the ranking member and all our members, both Republican and Democrat, for their hard work and continued bipartisan commitment to putting America's entrepreneurs first. As the ranking member likes to say, we don't have Republican businesses and Democratic businesses, we have American businesses, and we appreciate that. And this committee tries to operate in that manner as much as possible. While we will go into greater detail about what specifically each piece of legislation aims to accomplish, as it is considered, I want to emphasize the importance of moving forward on these reforms. When we improve these programs, we are stimulating the American economy by providing our nation's job creators, small businesses, greater clarity and greater access to valuable resources. In addition to helping small firms access government-sponsored resources, many programs increase oversight of the SBA and various federal agencies to ensure taxpayer dollars are being utilized effectively. In sum, these bills ensure these programs are meeting the needs of small businesses and that Congress receives the information it needs to properly oversee them. I would now like to recognize the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me also thank you for holding this important session and working with us in a bipartisan manner. This committee has a long history of working across the aisle to find solutions for the problems facing our nation's small businesses. I'm pleased that today's markup follows in that tradition, and I commend you for working with us. The bills before us will make significant progress in helping tackle some of small business' most daunting challenges while strengthening a number of SBA initiatives. America's entrepreneurs have always been vital to our technological growth and advancement. The Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs are one way in which we harness entrepreneurs' innovation and nimbleness to meet our nation's technology needs. Through this public-private partnership, federal agencies dedicate some of their research and development to small firms. This empowers entrepreneurs to develop new technologies and products that can be used by both the federal government or in private commerce. In recent years, SBIR companies has been involved in everything from developing brain mapping technology to creating the world's first molecular air purifier to developing drones used in our national defense. For these reasons, one piece of legislation we're marking up today will make valuable reforms to the SBIR and STTR programs. By granting agencies greater flexibility in how they award later stage grants, enhancing reporting requirements, and fostering commercialization of products, the changes in this bill will significantly strengthen these programs. I am also pleased that the chairman worked collaboratively with me in developing an amendment in the nature of a substitute to institute further reforms. I thank the chairman for working with us and look forward to moving this bill forward. Navigating the procurement process is frequently a challenge for small businesses, but it is particularly difficult when federal agencies significantly modify their work requests and withhold payment until additional work is performed by small companies. Late last month, the committee held a hearing examining how these change orders negatively impact small construction firms. I am pleased the committee is today reviewing legislation that will help small companies be more fairly compensated in these situations. Access to affordable capital, both loans and equity investment, is another long-standing challenge that this committee has prioritized. The final three bills we will look at today will approach capital access challenges with several different approaches. The Small Business Investment Company program has long been an important way of channeling capital to some of the most leading-edge, high-growth companies. Two of the bills under the committee's consideration today will help boost this program's success by changing how much leverage an SBIC can obtain from the SBA and by modifying how much private capital banks and savings associations can invest in this company. I believe these are worthwhile changes, and I look forward to considering them. Of course, for many of our smallest businesses, loans are a better fit for meeting their capital needs. The SBA's Microloan program helps some of the smallest of businesses and entrepreneurs just getting started secure loans, and technical assistance to launch or grow their ventures. The last bill we will discuss today will update the Microloan Program initiative to better meet the financing needs of our smallest, newest businesses. In sum, Mr. Chairman, I believe we have a strong package of bills before us and a number of promising amendments. Taken together, these measures could make some very important strides in assisting small business sector and in turn helping to create good paying jobs. So I would like to thank the chairman and all the members of the committee on both sides of the aisle, and I yield back.
Thank you, Gentlelady yields back, and I'd like to again thank her for her cooperation and both staffs, our staff and the Democratic staff, for working together to make this all possible, although we're not through it yet, so we'll see if it's possible. Before we turn to our first bill, are there any other members who seek to make an opening statement? Okay, if not, the first bill that we will be marking up today is H.R. 2763, the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Improvements Act of 2017. This bipartisan legislation introduced by Chairman Knight and Ranking Member Murphy of our Contracting and Workforce Subcommittee aims to modernize and improve the SBIR and STTR programs. And Mr. Knight is in a classified briefing, so it's my understanding that Mr. Comer will be speaking on this. And Mr. Comer, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, the sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Knight of California, had an unmovable classified meeting this morning and is unable to be here to speak on this legislation. I'm happy to do so instead. Small businesses are essential to America's economic competitiveness. Not only do they employ half the nation's private sector workforce, they also create 2/3 of net new jobs in our country. As we've said many times here in the Small Business Committee, it's innovation that drives our economy. That's why programs like the Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR, or Small Business Technology Transfer programs are so important. Now that these programs have been reauthorized until 2022, it's important that we continue to focus on spurring innovation. That is why the committee worked in a bipartisan manner to produce H.R. 2763, the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Improvement Acts of 2017. Among other things, the bill reinforces the requirement that the SBA give a comprehensive annual report of the SBIR and STTR programs to Congress by December 31st of each year. Additionally, the legislation will hold the Department of Defense accountable to stimulate technological innovation by requiring the DoD include more SBIR and STTR developed technology in larger programs of record. Mr. Knight would like to thank the ranking member of the subcommittee and on Contracting and Workforce, Ms. Murphy, for working with him in such a productive way on this important legislation. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member for the purpose of making a statement on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For more than 30 years, the SBIR and STTR programs have provided a critical source of funding to small businesses that engage in research and development. These initiatives were established to spur innovation and job creation throughout the country. Since their inception, over $40 billion in awards have been made, providing their success as a funding source for small, innovative firms while pushing the technological need forward. For the U.S. economy, the SBIR and STTR programs are important to employment in scientific and technical fields. While companies must hire individuals to carry out R&D, any research commercialized through government contracts then leads to sustainable jobs in high-growth business fields. This ingenuity is what makes America a global economic powerhouse. Last month, the committee held a hearing on these programs and learned not only about the benefits this program provides to small businesses, but also the value they deliver to federal agencies. These companies receive R&D funding that will otherwise be unavailable, while providing agencies goods and services that increase their efficiency and capabilities. As a direct result of these programs, breakthroughs have been made in a wide range of sectors, from agriculture to energy and most notably, healthcare. That is why I'm glad that Congressman Knight has introduced this bill with Congresswoman Murphy. After over a decade of fits and starts, H.R. 2763 will provide much-needed certainty to small businesses by authorizing the administrative fee to run this program for an additional 5 years. Additionally, it requires the SBA to provide its annual report on the counting of funds and initiatives of the participating agencies not later than December 31st of each year. This program is a result of the SBA failing to submit reports on a timely basis. I believe this provision is sensible so members of this committee can ensure SBA meets its statutory reporting requirements. Another provision makes permanent the pilot program that establishes the Civilian Agency Commercialization Readiness Program, which allows no more than 10% of agency administrative dollars for the purpose of awarding sequential Phase 2 awards to eligible businesses. I want to thank Ms. Murphy and Mr. Knight for holding their joint subcommittee hearing in May that allow us to hear from participants of this program and for putting forth legislative changes to fulfill this committee oversight function of the program. With that, Mr. Chairman, I urge all my colleagues to support this bill.
Thank
I
you.
yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. The chair will now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Murphy, if she would like to make a statement.
I thank the chairman for yielding.
Thank you.
I want to thank him and his staff, as well as the ranking member and her staff, for all their hard work on the slate of bipartisan bills we're considering today. And I'm proud to have worked with Congressman Knight to introduce H.R. 2763, which will make improvements to the SBIR and STTR programs to support the growth of small businesses through commercialization. The SBIR and the STTR programs have stimulated technological innovation and job creation across the country. Since the inception of the programs, more than $40 billion have been awarded to small, innovative firms to address our nation's most important research and development challenges. As a direct result, breakthroughs have been made in a wide range of sectors, including agriculture, energy, and healthcare. In turn, these discoveries have generated tremendous economic growth and job opportunities in communities across the country, including in Central Florida. For many research companies in my district, these two programs serve as a gateway to the federal contracting field. As Chairman Knight and I heard during a subcommittee hearing last month, these programs, while successful, can be improved. The bill before us is a step in the right direction insofar as it will ensure that all federal agencies are enhancing efforts to help more small businesses obtain SBIR and STTR grants and commercialize their products. I urge my colleagues to support the underlying bill as well as the amendments that other members of the committee and I intend to offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes. We want to thank everybody. Are there any other members, by the way, who seek recognition on this particular bill? Okay. These two initiatives play pivotal roles in the development of new technologies while giving federal agencies innovative and cost-effective ways to solve operational problems. The SBIR and STTR programs are highly popular and have helped thousands of small businesses create new technologies, commercialize their ideas, and generate new jobs. H.R. 2763 strengthens these programs in 5 ways. First, the bill insists on agency accountability, including several hard reporting deadlines for participating agencies and for the SBA to provide future Congresses with better information and a greater grasp of the program's strengths and weaknesses. Second, the legislation clarifies the congressional intent of the 2011 reauthorization to ensure that taxpayers reap the benefits of the SBR and STTR programs by tying them to long-term projects at the Department of Defense. Third, the legislation extends a popular pilot program included in the 2011 reauthorization that would allow all participating federal agencies to award a Phase 2 contract if the agency finds that the small business concerned has already completed work typically done during Phase 1. Fourth, it makes permanent the option for participating agencies to establish commercialization readiness programs, or CRPs. As a pilot program from the 2011 reauthorization, these CRPs have been shown to provide much-needed assistance to small firms nearing the completion of the process and have helped advance technology to the commercialization phase. And fifth, it extends through 22, the provision to allow participating agencies to utilize 3% of their allocation for administrative functions, increase waste, fraud, and abuse deterrence, and conduct outreach in an effort to bring more companies into the SBIR and STTR world. I again want to thank Mr. Knight and Mr. Comer for filling in for Ms. Knight and Ms. Murphy for their bipartisan work on this important legislation. I urge my colleagues to support the bill. And if there's no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 2763. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2763.
Without objection, H.R. 2763 is considered as read, and as customary with committee practice, open for amendment at any point. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Without objection,
HR.
the amendment is considered as read, and I want to thank Mr. Knight and Ms. Murphy for working with Ranking Member Velasquez and myself to develop a bipartisan amendment in the nature of a substitute. This amendment does not change anything in the base bill. However, it adds 3 provisions to the legislation. First, the amendment reinforces congressional intent by ensuring participating agencies use part of the SBIR allocation to conduct outreach to underrepresented states and populations by removing the waiver of this requirement from the existing statute. It is a good government provision that ensures that the agencies participating in the SBIR and STTR programs conduct congressionally mandated outreach across the country, not just to specific parts of it. Second, a provision has been added that mandates each of the participating agencies meet and discuss methods used to collect data to make the application process more efficient and increase participation in the program. Reducing paperwork burdens has been a priority for this committee, and this provision puts in a mechanism to do just that for the SBIR program. The third amendment, in the nature of a substitute, clarifies congressional intent that by their nature, the SBIR and STTR programs are competitively sourced and ensures that Phase 3 awards are deemed to be in compliance with competitive procedures as they are given as follow-on awards. Taken together, these provisions will help strengthen the SBIR and STTR programs and will help more small businesses participate. I would now like to recognize the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for any remarks that she may have on the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment in the nature of a substitute includes some important improvements to the initial bill and contributed by members from both sides of the aisle. The first amendment included in the ANS requires participating agencies to use part of their SBIR allocation to conduct outreach to minorities and underrepresented states by removing the waiver of this requirement from the statute. This is an issue that is very important to me and that I have been, continuously we have raised throughout the oversight of the program in this committee. The next amendment requires an annual summit of participating agencies so they will be able to discuss best practices to improve their ability to collect data and streamline processes of the SBIR, STTR programs. Both of the above amendments come from Congressman Evans and Congressman Pratt legislation. I thank them for their efforts in ensuring the diversity in SBIR participants and encouraging efficiency. The last amendment included in this substitute provides real benefit to both the SBIR company and the government. It ensures that the Phase 3 awards are deemed to be in compliance with competitive procedures as they are given awards derived from previous SBIR grant efforts. They therefore do not need to be competitively bid, resulting in a more efficient and cost-effective process. The amendment in the nature of a substitute for consideration will provide comprehensive reforms to the SBIR, STTR programs, and again, I want to commend the chairman for his continued commitment to bipartisanship. As a result, we have a stronger product that I'm glad to support. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members who seek to be recognized for a statement on the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, I would ask unanimous consent that the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as base text for the purposes of amendment and that it may be open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. And we will now proceed with the amendments. In this instance, I'm going to suggest going through the amendments in the order in which they were submitted. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment? Yes, for the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, is recognized. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment on the desk.
Okay, excuse me. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment 1 to H.R. 2763.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, Ms. Knight and Ms. Murphy, for your leadership in guaranteeing the SBA and the SBIR program has the resources needed to help our nation's small businesses set up and research institution. My amendments create a pilot program under the SBIR program that will provide additional funding for phase 1 of the SBIR program. My amendment will specifically help small business receive additional funding support to help bring the products and services from the commercialization stage of development and to the actual marketplace. The SBIR program encourages small business to perform research for federal agencies in the field of innovation and technology with the potential to bring their research products into commercialization. The program is beneficial not only to small business but to research facilities that support small business and startup such as university. It is my hope that research institutions all across this country and specifically within the state of Florida, including the district that's had innovation hubs at Florida A&M and Florida State University, University of North Florida, will have the opportunity to utilize the SBIR program to keep developing cutting-edge technologies that will see our country into the future. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Representative Lawson for this amendment. We have heard continually from small businesses regarding the lack of funding and difficulty in commercializing the research. There is a gap known as the Valley of Death facing small research companies, which requires extra capital to overcome. While the 2011 reauthorization of the SBIR, STTR programs allow agencies to award additional Phase 2 grants to overcome this valley, more options are needed to bridge this gap. This amendment seeks to require the head of all agencies that have SBIR programs to implement a commercialization assistant pilot program for the purpose of increasing commercialization of SBIR research. This will not only help small businesses bring products to the marketplace, but it will also help agencies quickly integrate solutions into the field. For this reason, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the gentleman again and to thank you and the staff for working together in a bipartisan manner to improve this bill. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members who seek to be heard on this particular amendment? Gentlemen? Okay. All right, seeing no others, allow me to thank the gentleman for his work. I support this amendment that continues the committee's longstanding focus on the commercialization of technologies developed in the SBIR program. The amendment adapts the very successful National Science Foundation Phase 2B program that assists small firms with promising technology to navigate, as the ranking member mentioned, the valley of death that can often leave good ideas on the lab floor. Providing participating agencies with a mechanism to further assist the commercialization of SBIR-developed technologies offers taxpayers the biggest return on their investments. I'm happy to support this amendment, and again, we appreciate the gentleman offering it. If there are no further members who wish to speak, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments? And the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Murphy, is recognized for the purpose of offering an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Okay, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment 2 to H.R. 27.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would direct procurement center representatives and directors of small and disadvantaged business utilization at every federal agency to increase their involvement in the SBIR and STTR programs. While the PCRs and other acquisition personnel at every federal agency are generally tasked with identifying contracting opportunities for small businesses, they are not yet advocating adequately for small business concerns through the SBIR and STTR programs, which can potentially translate into lost opportunities for many small firms aspiring to bring their technology to market. My amendment would address this issue by requiring these acquisition personnel to assist small businesses seeking to participate in the SBIR and STTR programs by researching possible contracting opportunities and providing them with the technical assistance needed when bidding for contracts. By officially integrating these acquisition personnel into the SBIR and STTR programs, this amendment will better position them to help small contractors move through the various stages of commercialization of their technology. The effect of the amendment will be to increase the number of knowledgeable procurement professionals who can assist small businesses grow, create more jobs, and bring their innovative products to market. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment, which I believe will strengthen the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. The chair would recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank my colleague Murphy for her important amendment. As we all know, small, high-growth firms often face a disconnect when attempting to transfer their SBIR technologies to acquisition programs. If agency procurement officers were more directly involved, there could be a better match between SBIR research and an agency's needs. This amendment provides assistance to small business concerns in commercializing their technology when obtaining government contracts by directly incorporating acquisition personnel into the SBIR STTR program. PCR and senior procurement executives will be tasked with researching applicable solicitations for small SBIR STTR firms when bidding for contracts and coordinating with appropriate agency procurement officials. For this reason, I strongly support this amendment, and I ask my colleagues to also support it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members who seek recognition? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, allow me to thank the gentlelady for her efforts on this important issue. I support this amendment because it, too, continues the committee's longstanding emphasis on the commercialization of technologies developed in the SBIR program. The amendment does this by incorporating acquisition personnel into the SBIR and STTR programs where appropriate. Doing so gives small firms a better understanding of the government contracting process and increases their chances of success. I'm happy to support the amendment. I thank her, as I mentioned, for offering it. And the question is on Amendment 2, offered by the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Murphy. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized. Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment 3 to H.R. 2763.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your and the committee's work to support our local small businesses that specialize in innovative research with this legislation. The Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR program, and the Small Business Technology Transfer, STTR program, are two great examples of public-private partnerships that drive technological innovation, help us meet our research and development needs, and grow our economy. Today, I'm offering a bipartisan amendment with my colleague, Representative Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, that will improve the ability of small businesses that participate in these programs to commercialize their research by removing hurdles and streamlining the process. This amendment makes common sense changes to give participating businesses increased flexibility as they seek to commercialize breakthrough innovations. Last week, I introduced the Support Startup Businesses Act of 2017 with my colleagues, Representatives Ben Ray Lujan and Dan Lipinski, and today I'm offering this legislation as an amendment to H.R. 2763. I'm hopeful we can incorporate these reforms into the underlying bill to help our small businesses innovate. The amendment does three important things. First, It expands the list of allowable expenses for businesses participating in the SBIR and STTR programs. Right now, many common expenses faced by businesses seeking to bring their research to market are not covered. These costs include product sales, intellectual property protections, market research, market validation, and development of regulatory plans and manufacturing plans. Allowing small businesses to claim these expenses will reduce the hurdles facing innovators. Second, the amendment makes clear that awardees can select a vendor of their choosing to provide technical and business-related assistance services, which is a decision best left to the business owners with their knowledge of local providers. Finally, the amendment increases the funding that SBIR, STTR Phase 1 and Phase 2 awardees may use for startup-related commercialization activities. The amount for Phase 1 is increased from $5,000 per year to $6,500 per project. And the amount for Phase 2 is increased significantly from $5,000 per year to $35,000 per project. Improving the technical and business assistance available to companies in the SBIR and STTR programs means more startups will be able to commercialize their research, grow, succeed, and ultimately to create jobs. These are common sense improvements supported by members of both parties. I urge my colleagues to join me and Mr. Fitzpatrick in support of this amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and the chair will now recognize the co-sponsor of the amendment, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Entrepreneurship plays a key role in sustaining economic growth, and for the U.S. economy to grow and prosper in the age of globalization, we need to rely on the courage and innovative ideas of startups. Surprisingly, however, the U.S. ranks currently not first or second. We are 12th amongst developed nations in startup activity, lagging behind in new startup firms per capita, and according to the Census Bureau, for the first time in 35 years, American business deaths outnumber American business births. While job creation from startups showed signs of recovery in 2014, it still is at lower levels than prior to the recession. Reviews of the SBIR program show that it is working. It's meeting nearly all of its statutory objectives and is having a positive overall impact on stimulating technological innovation and meeting federal research and development needs. But we can make it stronger, which is why I urge my colleagues to join myself, Mr. Schneider, in supporting this amendment. It's a bipartisan amendment that will increase funds for Phase 1 awardees from $5,000 to $6,500 and from Phase 2 awardees from $10,000 to $35,000. And additionally, this amendment expands needed expenses, including market research, intellectual property protections, development of regulatory and manufacturing plans, all of which are expenses critical for taking a startup to a full-fledged business. And I want to thank my colleagues, Representatives Knight and Murphy, in developing this legislation, and to my colleague, Representative Schneider, for his support of this as well. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. I would now recognize Ranking Member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I commend both gentlemen, Mr. Schneider and Mr. Fitzpatrick, for this important amendment. As we all know, third-party investors can serve multiple roles for startup companies. They can provide technical assistance for growing businesses and centralize the location for investors to find vetted businesses. These arrangements reduce investor risk while maximizing the capital network for high-growth companies. The amendment will allow for increased flexibility for use of funding within Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the SBIR STTR programs. It expands the list of allowable expenses to include product sales, IP protections, market research, market validation, and development of regulatory and manufacturing plans. Doing so furthers the goal of the SBIR program and serves to facilitate the best use of funding dollars. I support the amendment, and I ask all my colleagues to do the same. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members who seek recognition for the purpose of speaking on this amendment? Seeing none, I would like to thank both Mr. Schneider and Mr. Fitzpatrick for their work. I support the amendment because it gives the SBIR awardees greater flexibility in how they can best utilize their grants. Providing this flexibility can increase the chance of success, which helps create jobs and grow the economy. I'm happy to support the amendment. And the question is on Amendment 3, offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Thank you. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment 4 to H.R.
Without
27.
objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment offered by Mr. Espaillat and myself is a common sense, good government amendment that has two parts. First, it requires each of the agencies that participate in the SBIR program to submit their annual report directly to Congress at the same time they report to the SBA. Under the current system, the agencies only have to submit their annual reports to the SBA, who then compiles the information and is supposed to provide Congress and the public one consolidated annual report. Unfortunately, the SBA is currently 3 and soon to be 4 years delinquent on their annual reports to Congress. This is unacceptable. Our amendment not only gets the agency's annual reports out in the open, it'll also help us understand where the problem lies. These annual reports are critical for oversight of the SBIR and STTR programs, and we need them to make informed decisions about the programs moving forward. The second part of our amendment states that the Department of Defense must issue a report to Congress detailing what goals and incentives they have devised to boost inclusion of SBIR and STTR developed technology in larger programs of record. In 2011, Congress gave the Department of Defense the authority to set goals and develop incentives to increase the number of Phase 2 SBIR and STTR contracts in large Department of Defense contracts. Unfortunately, the Department of Defense has not established these goals, or if they have, they haven't let us or the public know about them. I am pleased to see that the underlying legislation reinforces this mandate and plainly reinforces congressional intent that the Department of Defense must establish these goals and incentives. Our amendment simply stipulates that the Department of Defense report to Congress on what goals they have set and what incentives they have provided for program managers and prime contractors to help boost the use of SBIR developed technologies. I ask my colleagues to support this bipartisan common sense amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair would now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, who is also the principal sponsor of this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Ranking Member, and Mr. Bloom. The Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Programs are valuable programs that provide small business with the opportunity to receive and utilize crucial grant funding for research and development. That is why I'm supportive of this Improvement Act, which will enhance these programs while ensuring that the programs are executed efficiently and efficiently. I am co-sponsoring this bipartisan amendment to further improve the language of this bill to strengthen the reporting requirement of SBIR and STTR recipients to ensure that minority and underrepresented states will be properly afforded the ability to complete all 3 phases of review. For Phase 1 and Phase 2 programs, the success should be measured not only by quality, but also by the diversity of entrants into the market as a measure of success. The reporting element of this language will permit SBA to have a qualitative and quantitative data to ensure that SBIR and STTR awardees are going to entrants who need the resources to meet the standards of Phase 1 and Phase 2 activity that they should be receiving such funding. For the sake of the program integrity, it allows SBA to actively oversee the dispensation of its SBIR and STTT awards to make sure that agents are not gaming the system towards a monopoly at the expense of innovative and deserving small businesses. I am proud to support this amendment along with my colleague, Mr. Bloom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Ranking Chair, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to commend both Mr. Bloom and Mr. Espaillat for this important amendment. In this committee, we have heard time and again the lack of performance data from the SBA has negatively impacted the reach of the SBIR and STTR programs. SBA's failure to provide this data leave us unaware of where program improvements can be made. This amendment requires agencies to submit reports to the SBA and Congress by March 30th of each calendar year, with no exception. I know Mr. Espaillat particularly advocated for the portion of this amendment that requires the Secretary of Defense to report to Congress on what goals and incentives they have developed by December 31st of each year. Such detailed reports will allow this committee to properly oversee this program. For this reason, I want to thank both gentlemen for this amendment. I ask my colleagues to support it, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members that seek to speak on this amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, I want to again thank both Mr. Bloom and Mr. Espaillat for this amendment. This provision helps our committee's oversight capabilities by requiring that each of the agencies participating in both these programs send annual reports to Congress on their programs. Previously, each agency would have to submit these reports only to the SBA, which is responsible for compiling all the data and producing one annual report to Congress. The problem we've encountered is that the SBA is almost 4 years behind in sending us these reports. The gentleman's amendment gets us the information we need and helps us identify where the process is breaking down. Along similar lines, the amendment also requires greater reporting requirements for the Department of Defense's SBIR and STTR programs, which will again help with our oversight responsibilities. Therefore, I'm happy to support this amendment. The question is on Amendment 4, offered by the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Bloom, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any other members who offer, we're here to offer amendments? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 2763 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment, excuse me. Questions on it? And the amendment is agreed to. Or excuse me, H.R. 2763 is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2763 as amended to the House. And this will be a roll call vote, so the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Shabbat.
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. King. Aye. Mr. King votes aye. Mr. Luke DeMeyer. Mr. Luke DeMeyer votes aye. Mr. Bratt. Ms. Radewagen. Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Knight. Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
It's an aye vote.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It's an aye or a no, but it's aye.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Blum. Aye. Mr. Blum votes aye. Mr. Comer. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon.
Yes.
Ms. Gonzalez-Colon votes aye. Mr. Bacon.
Aye.
Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick votes aye. Dr. Marshall. Aye. Dr. Marshall votes aye. Mr. Estes. Ms. Velasquez.
Aye.
Ms. Velasquez votes aye. Mr. Evans. Aye. Mr. Evans votes aye. Ms. Murphy. Aye. Ms. Murphy votes aye. Mr. Lawson. Aye. Mr. Lawson votes aye. Ms. Clark. Aye. Ms. Clark votes aye. Ms. Chu. Ms. Adams. Aye. Ms. Adams votes aye. Mr. Espaillat. Aye. Mr. Espaillat votes aye. Mr. Schneider. Aye. Mr. Schneider votes aye.
Are there
Mr.
any
Bratt.
Excuse-
Mr. Bratt votes aye.
Are there any other members who wish to vote? The clerk will report the vote.
19 ayes, 0 noes.
On this vote, the ayes are 19 and the noes are 0. The bill is favorably reported to the House, and without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation and to make other necessary technical corrections and conforming changes. Our next bill for consideration is H.R. 2594, the Small Business Payment for Performance Act of 2017, introduced by Mr. Fitzpatrick, along with Chairman Knight and Ranking Member Murphy of our Contracting and Workforce Subcommittee. I now recognize Mr. Fitzpatrick to speak on H.R. 2594.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For small businesses across the country, federal contracts can lead to good jobs, but can also result in many headaches. While businesses regularly deal with change orders in the private sector, contractors and subcontractors in federal construction projects are often forced to bear a financial burden by a slow process of approval. Some federal agencies even routinely delay the approval process until the end of projects. This is inherently unfair to small businesses, which is what has led to the introduction of this bipartisan legislation, the Small Business Payment for Performance Act, which is H.R. 2594. This act will allow contractors to submit a request for equitable adjustment or an increase in fee to the agency. The contractor will then bill the agency for any actual change order work done while the REA is pending. Once the agency receives an invoice for a change order work completed, it must pay 50% of the change order work amount immediately to offset extra costs. This bill will not only hold federal agencies accountable for initiating changes to contracts, but it will also incentivize them to improve contract requirements at the outset, thus reducing the need for change orders. The National Electrical Contractors Association notes the benefits of this legislation are clear: transparency in federal construction contracting and providing contractors with a predictable flow of funds from the federal government to contractors for the work they perform. This legislation, Mr. Chairman, will meet that goal. I want to once again thank my colleagues, Ms. Murphy and Mr. Knight, for their leadership in this effort, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Murphy, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to work with Congressman Fitzpatrick and Congressman Knight to help introduce H.R. 2594, the Small Business Payment for Performance Act. This bill will address the issue of agency delays in processing and payment for change orders to small construction contractors. A few weeks ago, my colleagues and I held a subcommittee hearing on this issue. We heard testimony from small business owners who have experienced this issue firsthand. Federal agencies routinely delay the approval process for change orders or bundle them. This has created tremendous financial burdens and uncertainty for small construction firms that do not have the overhead margins of larger primes and cannot afford to go unpaid for work performed. By helping small businesses recover an interim partial payment of at least 50% for additional change order work performed, this bipartisan bill will help to ensure that small businesses are paid in a fair and timely manner. I ask my colleagues to support the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. The chair will now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As this committee seeks ways to foster small business growth and expansion, we must always carefully consider what is being done to maximize entrepreneurs' participation in the federal marketplace. As we all know, when companies are awarded federal contracts, the result is a win-win. Small businesses provide quality goods and services at affordable prices, meaning a better deal for the government and the taxpayers. At the same time, it can mean significant growth opportunity for small businesses and even the need for new employees. One long-standing barrier to small business participation in the federal marketplace has been the practice of contract modifications, which delays the payment to contractors while increasing the risk they take on. Agency delays can create significant financial burdens on contractors. Processing a change order can slow down other parts of the project, jeopardizing the ability of contractors to meet their obligations. Firms are often left with little choice but comply with changes without receiving a guarantee that they will get paid. This legislation provides some form of payment to prevent financial harm to a contractor footing the cost of modifications. Mr. Chairman, this committee has a long track record of working in a bipartisan manner, particularly when it comes to procurement issues. It is my hope we can continue that tradition to further small businesses' role as successful federal contractors. It is critical that this committee work to remove barriers preventing small firms from successfully performing federal work and getting paid for all the work they perform. I thank you and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and I have a 5-page statement to read here, and if the members don't mind, I'm going to move this along, skip that part of it, and ask if any other members want to speak on this. And if not, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 2594. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2594 to amend the small
Without
business.
objection, H.R. 2594 is considered as read, and as customary with committee practice, open for amendment at any point. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment?
Chairman,
For what purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the bill.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment 1 to H.R. 25.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After last month's joint hearings on change orders, testimonies and witness exchanges made it clear to me that valuable information was missing from the conversation about change orders and the associated delays in payment, including a demographic breakdown of affected small businesses. To fill in any knowledge gaps that Congress or industry may have, I'm offering an amendment that requires federal agencies to annually submit a report to Congress. My amendment directs agencies to report on each construction contract that they award to small businesses, including demographics and any contract modifications and associated equitable adjustments issued by the agency on such contracts. Because of the nature of the work, construction contracts must often have informal changes. This leads to delays associated with recognizing them as official and receiving compensation for them. At last month's joint hearing showed that this delay greatly affects the capital available to small construction contractors to cover the costs of supplies. However, neither industry nor Congress has a clear understanding exactly which small business contractors are impacted the most. As this committee seeks ways to foster small business growth and expansion, we must always carefully consider how policies impact not only the small business community as a whole, but small businesses that are historically disadvantaged, like minority and women-owned businesses. Mr. Chairman, this committee has a long track record of working in a bipartisan manner, particularly when it comes to procurement issues. And it's my hope that the committee continues that tradition to further small businesses' role as successful federal contractors by approving my amendment. My amendment ensures that Congress has the information that it needs to help more small businesses compete successfully in the federal marketplace. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members who seek to make the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is a very important amendment, and I want to commend the gentlelady for improving this bill. Federal agencies need to come to the realization that change order implications on small firms are a serious matter, particularly when business bankruptcy is a real possibility. Ms. Adams' amendment will allow appropriate oversight of this process, and that is why I strongly support it and urge other members to do the same. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members who seek recognition on this amendment? If not, I'd like to thank the gentlelady for offering her amendment. There is an unfortunate shortage of data regarding the prevalence of change orders on federal construction projects. This amendment seeks to obtain this valuable information by requiring agencies to submit an annual report detailing the record of issuing change orders on small construction contracts. This amendment is a reasonable approach for the committee to understand how widespread this practice actually is, agency-wide and government-wide, and to identify any trends that might be problematic. I'm happy to support the amendment, and the question is on Amendment 1, offered by the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there additional amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I now really have an amendment at the desk.
The gentleman who has been through a lot, and we certainly sympathize with the gentleman. The clerk will report his amendment.
Amendment 2 to H.R. 2594.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for as much time as he'd like to go on. So,
Mr. Chairman, I think y'all are laughing at me, not with me.
we are with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to consider H.R. 2594. Thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick, Ms. Murphy, and Mr. Knight, for your leadership on this important legislation. I'd like to express my support for H.R. 2594, which brings much-needed financial stability to our small construction contractors. I offer this amendment to increase transparency and agency accountability in the change order process. The joint subcommittee hearing that Mr. Knight and I had an opportunity to chair on May 25th highlighted a major imbalance of the power between the federal government and contractors, resulting in a lack of agency accountability. Agencies operate under the cover of darkness, routinely able to delay the approval of payment on change orders and accompanying requests for equitable adjustment without explanation or consequence. Small contractors have little choice but to continue working and waiting until paperwork has been cleared in order to receive full payment for the work they've performed. This could take weeks, months, and sometimes even years. Imagine going to work every day having no idea when your next paycheck is coming. Imagine how difficult it would be to plan for monthly expenses or any new expense under these circumstances. Small contractors find themselves in similar situations, not knowing what to expect or when to expect resolution of a pending change order makes it difficult for small contractors to make strategic financial decisions or plan for their next job opportunity. This amendment addresses this problem by requiring agencies notify the small businesses of their status of the request for equitable adjustment each time the agency makes a partial payment pursuant to Section B of H.R. 2594. This notification requirement sheds light on an otherwise hidden process, allowing the small business some foresight into when to expect their next paycheck. This amendment also naturally builds in a tracking mechanism, allowing the contractor to keep a record of how fast or slow the agency is processing the request for equitable adjustment. This type of data is severely lacking in the current procurement process and will create a paper trail which may be used to further improve and expedite the change order process for small construction contractor. This amendment offers a simple solution to the problem at no cost. For all these reasons, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Do any other members seek recognition on this amendment? The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank the gentleman, Mr. Kelly, for this important amendment. It's straightforward, and which I support, and I ask my colleagues to support it. Yield back.
Thank you very much. Any other members like to speak? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, I'd like to echo Mr. Kelly's statement. This bill increases government accountability and transparency, which is crucial when federal agencies transact with small businesses. Currently, agencies operate in a black box when it comes to processing and approving requests for equitable adjustments. While the REA is pending resolution with the agency, small businesses are unable to obtain full payment for the change order work they complete. When small businesses do not know when to expect final resolution of the REA, making critical operational and resource decisions is increasingly difficult. This amendment adds a valuable step by requiring agencies to update small businesses on the status of their pending REA. Furthermore, this notice requirement automatically builds a record of agency conduct regarding the processing and payment of change orders and accompanying REAs. I want to thank Mr. Kelly for his addition and ask my colleagues to support this amendment. The question now is on Amendment 2 offered by Mr. Kelly. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Okay. And the clerk will report the next amendment. H.R. Amendment number 3.
Amendment 3 to H.R. 2594.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick, Ms. Murphy, Mr. Knight, for taking an important step tackling the change order issues with this legislation. I'd like to express my support for H.R. 2594, which promotes a small contractor sustainability as they perform work on agency-directed changes. I offer this amendment to make clear a step in the payment process that is concealed in the meaning of the bill text. Partial payment, as intended in H.R. 2594, is not made on the estimated request for equitable adjustment, or REA. The REA is negotiated between the contractor and agency. While these negotiations are pending, the contractor must continue to perform the changed work. H.R. 2594 allows contractors to submit proper invoices to the agency for actual work completed pursuant to the change order. It is for this actual completed work on the change order that the agencies submit their partial payments, and this amendment makes that process clear. This amendment language does not change the intent of H.R. 2594, but provides a stronger understanding of its application in the practice. For this reason, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. The ranking members recognize 5 minutes.
I commend Mr. Bacon for this amendment, and which I support, and I ask my colleagues on both sides to support it.
Thank you very much. And gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members that seek recognition on this? If not, I would just like to comment that I agree with the gentleman on this amendment. I thank him very much for offering it. If there are no other members who want to speak on it, the question is on Amendment 3 offered by Mr. Bacon. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. And I have an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment 4 to H.R. 2594.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and originally this amendment was to be offered by Mr. Knight, and we want to thank him for offering it, but he's been otherwise engaged, so we're going to go ahead and move forward on his behalf. This amendment provides an answer to an important question that we as legislators must always be vigilant in asking ourselves. Do the laws we enact actually have the intended effect? This amendment asks the Government Accountability Office, GAO, to conduct an impact analysis of this act on small construction contractors. We must monitor the consequences of these policies that we enact, and this amendment allows us to do exactly that. The lessons learned from this analysis will help shape and define future actions we take to protect small businesses. Therefore, I encourage my colleagues to support this. Are there any other members who seek any other members who seek recognition on this? Ranking member?
Just to say, Mr. Chairman, this is an important study that will be conducted by the GAO that will enable us to have an assessment and determine whether other policy changes are needed to improve the process within the federal marketplace. So I'm in support of this amendment, and I commend them for doing so. I urge my colleagues to support it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Are there any further members who seek recognition? If not, the question is on Amendment 4, offered on my behalf, on behalf of Mr. Knight. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other members that seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 2594 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2594 as amended is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2594 as amended to the House. And this will be a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Shabbat.
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. King. Mr. Lukemeyer. Mr. Lukemeyer votes aye. Mr. Bratt. Aye. Mr. Bratt votes aye. Ms. Radewagen.
Yes.
Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Knight.
Aye.
Mr. Knight votes aye. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Blum. Sorry, I had to. Mr. Blum.
Okay.
Mr. Blum votes aye. Mr. Comer. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon.
Aye.
Ms. Gonzalez-Colon votes aye. Mr. Bacon. Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Fitzpatrick votes aye. Dr. Marshall. Dr. Marshall votes aye. Mr. Estes. Mr. Estes votes aye. Ms. Velasquez.
Aye.
Ms. Velasquez votes aye. Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans votes aye. Ms. Murphy. Ms. Murphy votes aye. Mr. Lawson. Mr. Lawson votes aye. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes aye. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes aye. Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams votes aye. Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Espaillat votes aye. Mr. Schneider. Mr. Schneider votes aye.
Are there any other members who wish to vote? The clerk will report the vote.
21 ayes, 0 noes.
On this vote, the ayes are 21 and the noes are 0, and the bill as amended is favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation and to make other necessary technical changes and conforming changes. Without objection, members shall be entitled to 2 days to file additional supplemental, dissenting, and minority views. Next, we will consider H.R. 2333, the Small Business Investment Opportunity Act of 2017. This bipartisan legislation, introduced by Contracting and Workforce Subcommittee Chairman Steve Knight and co-sponsored by Ms. Chu and Mr. Curbelo, focuses on SBA's Small Business Investment Company Program, also known as the SBIC program. I would now like to recognize Dr. Marshall for remarks on H.R. 2333.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Mr. Knight's expected absence, I'd like to, and I'm honored to offer his bill, H.R. 233, the Small Business Investment Opportunity Act of 2017, which was introduced on May 3rd of this year. We constantly hear that access to capital continues to be a major problem for the nation's small businesses and startups. To help address the lending shortfall, the Small Business Administration offers numerous programs to increase access to capital for small businesses, including the Small Business Investment Company Program, also known as SBIC. To increase the amount of equity capital available to small businesses, H.R. 233 amends the Small Business Investment Act of 1958 by increasing the individual leverage limit, which determines how much capital can be provided to a small business by an SBIC, with only one fund under management, from $150 million to $175 million. Similar to legislation in 2015 that moved through this committee, it was signed into law that increased the family of funds limits. H.R. 2333 will enhance the ability of a small business to expand and create jobs. I strongly urge my colleagues to support Mr. Knight's legislations. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Are there other members, the ranking member, would like to make an opening statement on this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since 1958, the Small Business Company Program has been an integral part of the SBA mission to provide small businesses with capital and create jobs. To date, SBICs have assisted thousands of high-growth companies, providing over $100 billion in capital. The key to the program's success is leveraging federal funds to expand the amount of private capital invested in promising startup companies. By design, the program fills the gap in the capital markets for businesses that have outgrown the 7(a) program, but remain too small or risky for the private equity industry. The SBA provides funding to qualify SBICs with expertise in certain sectors or industry. The SBIC then, in turn, use their own funds and leverage from the SBA to invest in small businesses. This success of the program has pushed many SBIC licenses against the leverage caps, reducing the flow of capital to worthy small businesses. In recent years, Congress has raised the leverage limits for SBIC to maximize the impact for families of funds licensees, but neglected to assist SBICs that manage one company. Currently, that leverage cap is $150 million. Today's bill is narrowly tailored to increase the leverage limit exclusively for those SBICs. H.R. 2333, the Small Business Investment Opportunity Act of 2017, seeks to enhance the flow of capital to small businesses by increasing the cap to $175 million for an SBIC that manages just one company. Expanding access to capital for small businesses is a top priority for both sides of the aisle on this committee. So I hope the increase in leverage under this bill sufficiently accomplishes that goal, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and the principal sponsor of the bill, Mr. Knight from California, is recognized for the purpose of making a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Dr. Marshall for offering my bill in my absence. This is something that we talk about here in small business, is how we can get small businesses to react and expand and offer more opportunities. If they're going to do that, then they have to have the access to capital. And I think that this is a positive step forward, that everyone agrees that the advancement of $150 to $175 million does that. If this doesn't accomplish every goal, then we will revisit this in the future. And I appreciate Dr. Marshall and the chairman for offering this bill, and I request everyone vote yes on this, or aye.
Gentleman yield back. The gentleman from California yields back, and the gentlelady from California, the other principal sponsor of this bill, is recognized. Ms. Chu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to join my colleague and support this bipartisan piece of legislation today. Last Congress, I supported legislation to raise the Small Business Investment Company family of funds limit to increase the amount of capital going to small businesses through SBICs. I'm pleased to say this legislation was signed into law. However, while it included a limit increase for a group of funds, it did not include an increase for those having just one fund. The limit for one fund has remained at $150 million since 2009. The Small Business Investment Opportunity Act would increase this limit to $175 million in order to keep up with inflation. This change will result in more capital being deployed to small businesses around the country, making our economy stronger and creating more jobs. I commend the Small Business Committee for considering this bill today, and I urge all my colleagues to vote yes. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and I'm going to submit my 4-page statement for the record to help to move this along. And the committee now moves in consideration of H.R. 2333, and the clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2333.
Without objection, H.R. 2333 is considered as read and, as customary with committee practice, open for open for amendment at any point. Does anyone have an amendment?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment 1 to H.R.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This technical amendment modifies the language of H.R. 2333 to reflect the correct section in the United States Code from 682 to 683. This technical change occurs on page 1, line 8 of the legislation. I ask my colleagues to support this technical change. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and would the ranking member wish to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman, just to say that I'm in full support of this amendment, and I want to thank the gentleman for his work in improving the underlying bill.
Thank you very much.
Yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. And do any other members seek recognition? If not, the question is on Amendment 1, offered by the gentleman from Kansas, Dr. Marshall. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Okay. Are there any other members that seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 2333 as amended. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2333 as amended is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2333 as amended to the House. This will be a roll call vote, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Shabbat.
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. King. Mr. Lukemeyer. Mr. Lukemeyer votes aye. Mr. Bratt. Aye. Mr. Bratt votes aye. Ms. Radewagen. Aye. Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Knight. Aye. Mr. Knight votes aye. Mr. Kelly. Aye. Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Blum. Aye. Mr. Blum votes aye. Mr. Comer. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon votes aye. Mr. Bacon. Aye. Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Fitzpatrick votes aye. Dr. Marshall. Aye. Dr. Marshall votes aye. Mr. Estes. Aye. Mr. Estes votes aye. Ms. Velasquez. Ms. Velasquez. Aye. Ms. Velasquez votes aye. Mr. Evans. Aye. Mr. Evans votes aye. Ms. Murphy. Aye. Ms. Murphy votes aye. Mr. Lawson. Aye. Mr. Lawson votes aye. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes aye. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes aye. Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams votes aye. Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Espaillat votes aye. Mr. Schneider. Mr. Schneider votes aye.
Any other members who wish to vote? If not, the clerk will report the vote.
21 ayes, 0 noes.
On this vote, the ayes are 21 and the noes are 0, and the bill as amended is favorably reported to the House. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation and to make other necessary technical corrections and conforming changes. Staying with within the confines of the SBIC program, we will next consider H.R. 2364, the Investing in Main Street Act of 2017. This bipartisan legislation, introduced by Ms. Chu and co-sponsored by Contracting and Workforce Subcommittee Chairman Knight and Ms. Meng, focuses on a bank's investment in an SBIC. I would now like to recognize Ms. Chu for her remarks on H.R. 2364.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Chair. Oh, boy. Okay.
We need this.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy, accounting for 2 out of every 3 new jobs. And so, as part of our commitment to creating opportunities and growing our economy, it's our responsibility to help more small businesses succeed. The SBA's Small Business Investment Company, or SBIC, is an effective tool that facilitates private investment into small businesses all across the country at no cost to the taxpayer. In fact, last year alone, SBICs invested nearly $6 billion in domestic businesses that employ approximately 122,000 workers all across the U.S. Unfortunately, the SBIC program is currently restricted from taking more than 5% of capital investments from banks due to an outdated provision in the Small Business Investment Act of 1958. At the same time, current banking regulations established by the Office of the Comptroller, OCC, allow these same banks to invest up to 15% of their capital and surplus into SBICs. My bill would make a technical change and amend current law to allow banks to contribute up to 15% of their holdings to these funds. This change would strengthen and grow the SBIC program, unleashing more capital to small businesses. That means more entrepreneurs will be able to access the capital they need to grow their businesses and hire more workers. I'm pleased that the committee is considering this bipartisan legislation today, and I encourage all my colleagues to support this bill and increase access to capital for our job creators. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members who seek recognition? And does the ranking member wish to speak on this? She's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I want to commend the gentle lady from California for this important legislation. As we all know, the SBIC program is a private public investment program that increases access to capital for growth stage startup businesses. In 2016, the SBIC program provided $6 billion in financing to 1,200 small businesses and helped to sustain over 120,000 jobs. One of the SBIC program's greatest strengths is its hands-off approach, giving fund managers the autonomy to invest in almost any business sector they choose, from apparel to cutting-edge technology. This freedom, coupled with sound investment strategy, has led to its success. H.R. 2364 was introduced to strengthen and grow the SBIC program by letting banks and federal savings associations invest up to 15% of their holding into SBICs. This increase in capital at not cost to the taxpayer will provide entrepreneurs with enhanced opportunity to grow their businesses and create jobs. I believe this is a sensible change to address the number one need of small firms accessing capital. Again, I applaud Congresswoman Chu in identifying this issue and introducing this legislation. I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. The chair, in lieu of reading an opening statement on this, would just say I agree with the comments both of Ms. Chu and Ms. Velasquez, and I would now ask that the committee move to consideration of H.R. 2364, and the clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2364 to amend the Small Business
Without
Investment.
objection, H.R. 2364 is considered as read, and as is customary with committee practice, open for amendment at any time. Does anyone wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 2364. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2364 is agreed to. And the question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2364 to the House. This will be a roll call vote, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Shabbat.
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. King. Mr. Luchtmeyer. Mr. Luchtmeyer votes aye. Mr. Bratt. Mr. Bratt votes aye. Ms. Radewagen.
Aye.
Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight votes aye. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Blum. Mr. Blum votes aye. Mr. Comer. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon votes aye. Mr. Bacon. Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Fitzpatrick votes aye. Dr. Marshall. Dr. Marshall votes aye. Mr. Estes. Mr. Estes votes aye. Ms. Velasquez.
Aye.
Ms. Velasquez votes aye. Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans votes aye. Ms. Murphy. Ms. Murphy votes aye. Mr. Lawson. Mr. Lawson votes aye. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes aye. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes aye. Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams votes aye. Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Espaillat votes aye. Mr. Schneider. Mr. Schneider votes aye.
Are there any other members who wish to vote? If not, the clerk will report the vote.
21 ayes, 0 noes.
On this vote, the ayes are 21 and the noes are 0. The bill is favorably reported to the House, and without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation and make other necessary technical corrections and conforming changes. Without objection, members shall be entitled to 2 days to file additional supplemental, dissenting, and minority views. We will next consider H.R. 2056, and I believe this is the last bill, the Microloan Modernization Act of 2017. This bipartisan legislation, introduced by Ms. Murphy and co-sponsored by numerous members of this committee, seeks to improve the SBA's microloan program. I would now like to recognize Ms. Murphy for her remarks on H.R. 2056.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My bill, the Microloan Modernization Act, would make meaningful improvements to the SBA's microloan program, one of the agency's core lending programs. The underlying bill is supported by the Association for Enterprise Opportunities, Friends of the SBA Microloan Program, and the National Association of Women-Owned Business Owners. Mr. Chairman, I ask that these letters be submitted into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Under the microloan program, SBA provides loans to qualified nonprofit organizations known as intermediaries that provide short-term loans up to $50,000 to eligible entrepreneurs and small business owners. Recipients use these loans for working capital and to acquire supplies and equipment. The microloan program is open to all small businesses, but places particular emphasis on assisting new and early phase businesses in underserved markets, such as borrowers with little or no credit history, low-income borrowers, and women and minority entrepreneurs who generally cannot qualify for conventional loans or larger SBA guaranteed loans. There are currently 140 active microloan intermediaries who serve 49 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. In fiscal year 2016, SBA made 49 loans totaling $35 million to intermediaries, and intermediaries provided nearly 4,500 microloans totaling over $60 million to small firms. The average microloan to a small business was approximately $13,500. My bill would offer additional flexibility to intermediaries in 2 respects. First, under current law, an intermediary can borrow no more than $750,000 from SBA during its first year of participation, no more than $1.25 million each year thereafter, and no more than an aggregate of $5 million. My bill would increase the aggregate loan limit for intermediaries after their first year of participation in the program from $5 million to $6 million. Second, Congress annually appropriates about $25 to $30 million to SBA so that SBA can make technical assistance grants to microloan intermediaries. Intermediaries use this funding to provide training to small firms who are existing or potential microloan borrowers. However, under current law, an intermediary can use no more than 25% of its microloan technical assistant grant to provide pre-loan assistance. That is, assistance to a prospective microloan borrower as opposed to an approved microloan borrower. Microloan intermediaries have long regarded the 25% cap as an arbitrary requirement that limits their ability to design support services that address the specific needs of borrowers and get more prospective borrowers loan ready. For that reason, my bill would remove the 25% cap. I want to thank my colleagues on the committee who have co-sponsored this legislation, namely Ranking Member Velasquez, Congresswoman Clark, Congresswoman Gonzalez-Colon, and Congressman Bacon. I understand that my colleague from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon, intends to offer an amendment to this bill which will increase the 25% cap to 50% rather than eliminating it altogether, based on input provided by SBA. While I will not oppose this amendment, I hope that this committee will monitor implementation of this provision and determine whether it makes sense to remove the cap altogether. Nevertheless, we are taking a step in the right direction. H.R. 2056 will ensure that more entrepreneurs, especially women and minority-owned startups, are able to get the technical assistance and capital they need to successfully establish and grow their small enterprises. For that reason, I urge my colleagues to support the bill. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Puerto Rico, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, I speak in support of the Microloan Modernization Act. This is an important legislation that will eliminate one of the problems that exist in the Small Business Act. I am a proud co-sponsor of this legislation. Specifically, H.R. 2056 will repeal the 2575 rule under the Small Business Administration Microloan Program that assists low-income individuals in starting and operating small businesses. This will enable small business to provide greater assistance in small business marketing, management, and technical assistance grant funds, and provide information to small business borrowers. These changes are important to small businesses operating in Puerto Rico also. I thank Representative Stephanie Murphy and her staff for proposing these reforms to the microloan program. I also thank Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velasquez for smoothly guiding H.R. 2056 and today's other bills through the committee's legislative process. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to commend Ms. Murphy for this important legislation and for the improvement that has been made to the microloan program. This program is a critical resource to start up newly established or growing small businesses. Most importantly, many of these business owners come from traditionally underserved markets where personal and commercial credit are hard to come by, particularly women. They are the highest percentage of borrowers are women. And by the way, the default rate of this program is 2%. Such small loans have proven to be incredibly valuable to prospective entrepreneurs and to communities who badly need greater economic opportunities. However, the program could be improved to better assist small firms. Specifically, H.R. 2056 increases the microloan intermediary loan limit to $6 million from $5 million. By raising the cap by 20%, successful lenders will be able to serve more borrowers in high-demand locations. The microloan program fills a critical gap in the capital markets. I can think of no better time to make loan-sought changes to improve the program. These changes are beneficial and will ultimately go a long way toward creating opportunity for established enterprises and those who dream of going into business for themselves. I commend Ms. Murphy for offering this bill, and I encourage its passage. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back, and I'll submit my written statement for the record and just thank the gentlelady for offering this. The chair supports it, and we do appreciate your offering this. And if there's no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 2056. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2056.
Without objection, H.R. 2056 is considered as read and, as customary with committee practice, open for amendment at any point.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. For what purposes does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, sir.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment 1 to H.R.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
First, I just want to commend Congresswoman Murphy for the great work she's done on this bill. The 25% limit to how much pre-loan assistance can be offered by microlenders using SBA technical assistance grants is burdensome. My amendment increases the limit to 50%, provides microlenders the ability to provide more robust assistance at the beginning stages of guidance without removing important guardrails that are in place and the important referrals that flow to SBA resource partners like the Small Business Development Centers. With the support of SBA outlined in their FY 2018 congressional budget justification, lenders are underfunded in pre-loan technical assistance services and overfunded in post-loan assistance. Thus, a more balanced approach is needed. An increase from 25% to 50% will bring more flexibility to lenders that service small dollar borrowers that need the assistance near the beginning of the loan approval process. I urge my colleagues to support this balanced amendment that will further strengthen the microloan program, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you. And are there any other members who would like to speak on this amendment? And if not, I would just note that we support the amendment. I think it's a helpful amendment. I'll leave it there. And the question is on Amendment 1 offered by the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other members that seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on H.R. 2056 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2056 as amended is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 2056 to the House. This will be a roll call vote, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Shabbat.
Aye.
Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. King. Mr. Lukemeyer. Mr. Lukemeyer votes aye. Mr. Bratt. Mr. Bratt votes aye. Ms. Radewagen.
Aye.
Ms. Radewagen votes aye. Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight votes aye. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly votes aye. Mr. Blum. Mr. Comer. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon votes aye. Mr. Bacon. Mr. Bacon votes aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Fitzpatrick votes aye. Dr. Marshall. Dr. Marshall votes aye. Mr. Estes. Mr. Estes votes aye. Ms. Velasquez.
Aye.
Ms. Velasquez votes aye. Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans votes aye. Ms. Murphy. Ms. Murphy votes aye. Mr. Lawson. Mr. Lawson votes aye. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes aye. Ms. Chu. Ms. Adams. Ms. Adams votes aye. Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Espaillat votes aye. Mr. Schneider. Mr. Schneider votes aye.
Are there any other members who wish to vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report the vote.
19 ayes and 0 noes.
On this vote, the ayes are 19 and the noes are 0. The bill as amended is favorably reported to the House, and without objection, the committee staff is authorized to correct punctuation and to make other necessary technical corrections and conforming changes. And on that note, I want to thank the ranking member and all the members on both sides of the aisle. We had excellent attendance here today. Sorry this dragged on for a while, but we don't have that many markups in this committee, and when we do, we had a lot of bills this morning. I want to thank everyone for their attentiveness, and if there's no further business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you. All right, thank you, guys. Hey, good job. Thanks a lot. Good to meet you. Nadia. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Jan. Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, it's no problem.